All right, it's 10 o'clock. It's time to get started. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last day, not quite the last session for the week. You are in the Remote Attestations Procedures Working Group. If this is not what you're expecting to hear, you may be in the wrong room. By now,
Good morning, everyone. Roman D'Amelio, in case you're confused why I'm here. Neither Nancy nor Ned, who are remote, so I'm just up here as the AD helping Kathleen.
He means Kathleen. Yeah. So Kathleen and Ned, who are the co-chairs, are remote. So continuing on, everybody should be familiar with the note well. So let's proceed on. I want to thank Peter Yee for taking awesome notes. He will be one of our note takers. You may not see his notes on Etherpad, so Frank, if you could put some of the notes on Etherpad, I think it would be great. Encourage others to also observe and augment, as you see on the Etherpad as well. And Akira, are you okay being Jabber Scribe? Okay, great, thanks. So with those logistics out of the way, I just want to do a quick plug. I don't see Hannes here. No. Okay. That's why he asked me to do the plug. Okay. So since there are interdependencies between TEEP, SUIT, and RATS, we thought it would be good to begin some joint hackathons. So there is a plan to do just that in Berlin in the February timeframe. The slides should be there. You can upload them, but mainly for more information, you can go to the SIoT hackathon GitHub.io. So with that said, let's do a quick agenda bash since we have a lot to discuss today. So if you might have noticed, if you were tracking the agenda through the week, we've modified this so that we can focus on work that we should look forward in getting adoption so that we can actually formally track the issues and have a working document to work against. So with that, what we're going to do is begin with the security considerations for remote integrity verification draft. Guy is remote. Then we're going to have Dave Thaler on behalf of the new design/editorial team for the architecture draft go through that. So given that this is new work, that team has met. I know quite a few of you joined during the week. So we've allocated 45 minutes for that. Then we want to discuss and get to some questions vis-a-vis the draft titled the Basic EA module. So I want that discussion to be scoped more on getting us guidance as to what we want to do with the document, what the group wants to do vis-a-vis adopting Yang as a data model. And then Wei Pan will be substituting for Frank to present the PubSub model. So even though Frank is here, he's lost his voice. So Frank has asked for his co-author to present. So I'd like to have the discussion for adoption throughout, but I've left some time at the end to do conclusions or to do further questions if needed at the end. And hopefully, we might have a couple minutes at the end. So with that, any orders of business that I might have missed? Going once, twice? Okay, let's move on. So, yeah. Guy, if you can be on, we are going to bring up your slides.
Yes. I see my first slide. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
Nancy, thank you for...
Guy, just yell next slide when you're ready.
Yes, okay. And Nancy, thank you for being there in person. I know it's a long way. So what I wanted to do with this session is to try and get fairly quickly through the changes that we made to the RIV draft since the last meeting, in which we have added the conventional security considerations section of the document. What I wanted to do with that was to outline what some of the kind of considerations are in RIV from the point of view of a TPM guy, as opposed to all of the other kinds of considerations that should go into this from the IETF point of view. So I'll go through this fairly rapidly. The first couple of slides are review. Then there are a number of 4 slides, which address specific attacks and the relevant mitigations. And I think Jessica is on the line as well. So if there are questions, either one of us, I hope, can respond. So the first slide is simply yes, next, thank you. The first slide is simply the introduction to the work. Again, based on the TCG document originally, but it's evolved quite a bit by this point. Next slide, please. The problem statement, as before, we're simply trying to determine what software it is that's running on a remote device. And of course, that includes remote devices which have already been hacked, so they may not be totally truthful in their response. The point of RIV is not so much exactly how the measurements are collected, but rather how the workflow works. That is how the results are requested and conveyed and verified through the loop. There were questions about the scope of RIV, and I think we have not tried to put this in standards compliant text, but basically at the moment the scope of RIV is things, as in IoT things, not embedded systems that have a TPM, that use Yang, and that don't sleep. The TPM part, of course, is kind of critical to this work. The other pieces are more convenience to get the entire workflow done without getting too bogged down in the many different ways it could be applied. The obvious next step for work like this would be to extend it to other domains. For example, industrial IoT would have similar problems, but wouldn't find Yang very attractive, I think, and consequently would want to use some other transport protocol, and without being an industrial IoT expert, I don't know what it is. So we'd have to find the right expert to help extend it. Similarly, sleep modes can be handled with the TPM, but it's a little complicated. So I'd postpone that until we have a good reason to want to do it. Next slide, please. The information flows, again, this is unchanged. The verifier and relying party issue a request to the attester and expect a response. I know RIV does make a distinction between verifier and relying party. In RIV, unlike RATS, in RIV we have not made that distinction. That doesn't say it couldn't be made, and if RATS does specify an interface between the two, that's fine. I don't. There's no inherent reason why I don't want them distinguished. It's just that the focus of this work is the stuff that crosses the red line on this slide, between the combination of verifier and relying party and the attesting device. Next, please. Okay, so this is the start of the new material for this work. In security considerations, we've factored in key mitigations for key compromise, counterfeit devices, man-in-the-middle attacks, and replay attacks. And let's go through what each one of those would be. Next. Key compromise, again, I don't mean this as a general statement of all kinds of mitigations, but rather the ones that are unique to systems that have TPMs and that we'd like to not break in the process of merging the stuff into the RATS world. So RIV depends on keys which are generated inside the TPM for both identity and attestation. And a tenet of a TPM methodology is, oh, interesting. Where does that, oh, I see, there's a chat in the bottom right corner. Yeah, and Nancy, that must be on your machine.
It's on the Chrome. I don't.
Yeah, okay.
Oh,
Anyways, one of the tenets of TPM design is that keys which are generated inside the TPM cannot be exported. So this is not a rule of unless you have the right privileges, they cannot be, secret keys cannot be exported unless you can find a bug or mount a physical attack, a challenging physical attack. So for most purposes, we'd say secret keys cannot be exported from the TPM, and that is the fundamental premise in how we defend against compromise. Of course, whoever puts the keys there and puts the certificates there needs to be sure that they are careful about what they sign. But the keys themselves that prove identity and attestation are challenging to steal or compromise or extract in any way. Next, please. Defense against counterfeit devices. If you're going to attest something, you'd like to know that you're attesting the thing you think you're attesting. In the case of RIV, that has been accommodated simply by expecting that the manufacturer will install device credentials before they leave the factory. So if a manufacturer provisions an initial device ID using 802.1AR, then that provides the serial number and certificate, which is signed by the manufacturer. When you retrieve that information, the user, the verifying, the verifier or the relying party, presumably the person who owns the machine knows the serial number because everybody's systems track serial numbers already. So if you know the serial number and you know the manufacturer, then you can verify that the device you're testing is in fact the one that you purchased and put in the location where you expect it. We have asked for pre-provisioning of the device ID and the attestation keys, in this case, pre-provisioning them to allow for secure zero-touch provisioning, as in RFC 8572. That is not fundamental to RIV, but as far as getting this to work for, let's say, ordinary enterprises, we're trying to make it as close to an out-of-the-box experience as possible. That is, you know the serial number, you provision the serial number in your own management system, and beyond that, the rest of it, just plug the box in and it'll figure it out itself. Next, please. The man-in-the-middle attacks, there are of course many, but there are a couple that are of particular relevance. One of the, there are a couple of issues to deal with here. The identity, of course, depends, the identity of the box depends on the device ID, which has a key, which we keep inside the TPM. But the attestation evidence, which shows which what software is running on the box, that attestation evidence also is collected inside the TPM and signed inside the TPM. So we use a separate key for attestation and identity. And this is probably not completely obvious why we would do such an annoying thing, but the purpose of the device ID key is to prove identity of the device and to sign whatever it's given to prove that it has that key. What we do not want is for the attestation evidence to be signed by a key that can sign anything else. And this is to prevent the case where a system which has been compromised could make up a quote showing a particular software configuration, get the TPM to sign it and send that back. So as long as attestation is done using a separate key, then that cannot happen. That blocks a thing which has been called the ASOCAN attack, RFC 6813, in which a faulty device, a compromised device, proxies to a good device to get attestation results, and then sends those back as its own. If you're not careful about which key is which, then the verifier could be duped into accepting the bogus results that were effectively created by a man in the middle. That is the device that has been compromised. So that is what leads us to ask for separate device ID and attestation keys to ensure that those keys come from the same TPM. We have asked that the attestation certificate should contain the same identity information as the dev ID. So that means the same serial number and the same manufacturer's signature on those two certificates. And at that point, on the receiving end in the verifier, you can look at the two certificates, see that they are signed by the manufacturer you trust, and they contain the serial number that you think is the box you're talking to. And at that point, you know you've got the attestation results from the right thing and not an ASICAN attack wrong thing. Next, please. This picture just illustrates that the lower part of the picture, the device identity simply signs a nonce with a key which is inside the TPM and returns the signed nonce to prove that it holds the identity key along with the identity certificate. The upper part of the picture is the attestation information, the evidence, and that is obtained by receiving measurements from outside the TPM, storing them inside the TPM, creating the response, the quote, which includes a nonce, and signing it with the attestation key that's inside the TPM that can be used for nothing except signing that quote. And as long as the two certificates have the same identity information in them, then you can tell that they are from the same place. In TPM lore, there are a number of ways of doing this, some of which are privacy preserving and some of which are kind of complicated. And we've tried to sidestep all of that by this simple mechanism of provisioning the keys in advance in a way that you can tell that they, if you trust the CA, you can tell they come from the same place. Next, please. Finally, the defense against replay attacks. I think this is extremely conventional. Anything that wishes to prove identity, of course, the way you do it is by sending a nonce and making sure that that nonce is signed by the secret key that corresponds to the public key that you know. So that proves freshness. The attestation evidence is handled more or less the same way, that when the TPM is used to sign, construct and sign the quote, it includes a nonce which comes from the verifier. So the evidence coming back from the TPM for attestation includes the nonce which came from the verifier. Again, proving that the result is fresh, is current. There's an alternate approach called TUDA that Hank has worked on that doesn't require as many back and forth exchanges, but that currently is not part of GRIV. Could be, but not at the moment. So I think the replay defense is pretty conventional. So next slide, please, just to finish up. The point I guess I'd like to make is that the rules imposed by the design of the TPM provide evidence of identity and software integrity, both of which are quite difficult to forge and don't depend on the good health of the device being attested. That is, the device can be hacked any way you like, and if it responds to the request for attestation at all, then you can be sure that it came from the TPM and has not been messed with by the tampered device or anything else in the chain. The result of this, the implication of this statement is that the TPM data structures really have to be transmitted unmodified, and that has been accommodated in the Yang model as it is, but we need to preserve that property as we go forward with this. And with that, I think I have covered the points I wanted to cover. Nancy, if there are questions, of course, I'm glad to.
Yeah, so I'm going to allow 2 minutes of questions because I want to give ourselves, if I can, 2 minutes to ask the question about the draft.
Which things do you want now versus at the end? 'Cause those-
So let's do 2 minutes of questions about the draft. But the question that I want to pose to the group, and actually first to the authors, is the intent for the draft with respect to rats. Go ahead, Michael.
I have an opinion about that too, but I
Okay,
have a
state your
clarifying.
name.
Michael Richardson, I have a clarifying question for Guy. Do you think it would be useful for us to have another name that's not iDev ID or LDev ID for the Dev ID, which is in the TPM, which is not the same certificate as the other things, even though the TPM may have the iDev ID and LDev ID things in it for other purposes? It sounds like we need a new term for that, and I wondered if there is one. And given that it is signed by the manufacturer of the TPM or the device, I'm not really clear on that, but it has to have the same info on it. I would like to have some additional, as a user of an iDev ID in my protocol, I would like to have some understanding of the certificate path relationship with the thing that's doing that part. And it almost sounds to me like my iDev ID should actually be a subservient certificate from the one that's using attestation. That actually might simplify things for the manufacturer's processes.
Michael, thank you. So this is an area where on that early slide where we outlined the scope, where the word thing is the escape hatch here. By scoping this to embedded devices, that means that there is a relatively clear manufacturer and that the manufacturer has some control over how the software works on the thing as well. I shouldn't mean to say this is fundamental, but as a way to think about it, for a router, we build the router. When we manufacture the router, we solder down the TPM, and before we ship the router, we configure an IDEV certificate in it and sign it with a key that's traceable to the, since I work for Juniper, to the Juniper root, to the root certificate of the manufacturer. The IAK, the attestation key, I would see as a peer to that is signed using the same chain back to the manufacturer's root key, which would be published and well known.
Okay,
as
we're kind of running out of time here, guys, so sorry.
Yeah.
Lawrence,
Okay.
so Lawrence is in the queue and you will be the last one, but it has to be really quick.
Okay. Lawrence Lundblad. So in your first bullet on the conclusion there, I believe that you're talking about identity and software integrity at boot. It only, all of this that you've discussed about integrity, anti-tampering, and identity is all at boot. 1 second after boot, if there was tampering or something was modified with the software, somehow a bug was found, none of that would be detected. This primarily is focused on boot, not on runtime integrity check later. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a gray area so for BIOS and loader, that's completely true. For OS level attestation, it gets a bit grayer because we are assuming this is based on something like IMA, and IMA continues to run through the life of the product, but the life of the boot. But once the thing, I think your point is, once something has been launched, it measures at launch, and after that, it's the RIV is out of the picture. So it's not intended to provide runtime verification. It ensures, it tells you what it was that launched. It doesn't tell you what it is that's running continuously.
Makes sense.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, Lawrence is shaking his head yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so with that, what I wanted to ask you and Jess, as she's on the Metago as well, as the authors of this draft, is the intent that you would like to see this draft adopted as a working group item or something else?
Nancy, so I will defer to judgment of people who know better, but it seems like this could turn into an informational RFC, right? That it's not intended to be normative, but at the same time, it does seem useful to have a use case that works all the way through the whole flow, and so we can tell whether all of the parts are there and they all work together.
Okay, so I guess the question is, and I will pose it to the group. I'm sorry? Now. So since we're talking about this topic. So it seems like what I'm hearing you say and what I've heard from some of the feedback is that there is value in what you're describing potentially as a use case or potentially as an influence to what may be in the architecture. So what I'd like to hear from the group is your opinions on the content either being in this draft and going informational. So the three options are going informational with this draft, incorporating the content into either a use case or part of the architecture or both, or the third is nothing at all.
So,
So- Well, no, I said I was leaving that 15 minutes as a buffer at the end, but given that we're in this context, yeah. So,
So if I could just inject kind of one more thing before we start talking, just as a reminder, based on how we wrote up some things in the chartering, use cases, we're going to specify the use cases to document and achieve consensus, but we do not expect to publish them as an
Correct.
RFC. Just to remind everyone, that's what the ground
Correct.
rules we set out as.
so I'm going to set 4 minutes for this discussion, and then we'll move forward. Go, Michael.
Michael Richardson. So having read the document and felt that, yes, it was very useful input into the architecture and the use case pieces, what I assumed that was going to happen to the document was the document was going to then proceed onwards to stake some claims and write some normative language and become a standards track profile of the architecture. Okay, so that if I wanted to buy a product that had RIV in it, I would specify this standards track document, which would then refer to the architecture and EAT if that was appropriate or whatever. That's what I assumed that this document was going to. That yes, it only described the use case right now is because they don't have we haven't told them how to describe the solution based on the architecture, but that would come afterwards there, and that the part that's there now motivates the rest of the piece of the implementation, right?
Sorry, the parts that's there.
The document that we have now was, saying this is what our problem that we want. We don't know how to solve it yet, but so please build an architecture so that we can solve it. And once you've told us that, we'll explain how we're using the architecture to solve it. That's what my understanding of the document was, but maybe that doesn't match other people's.
Dave Taylor, I agree that all 4 of those, meaning the 3 that Roman mentioned and the one that Michael mentioned, are options. I don't have enough information to choose between those yet. I have comments in the document, but I don't have enough information, and so I think Michael's comment was similar to that. He doesn't know whether the intent is to be standards track or not, depending on what the working group wants to do, what the authors want to do with this document. I will say that I think that the title of the slides was actually more clear than the title of the document, and so really just what is the scope, right? Is the scope going to include claims? Is it just the informational stuff, which is what Guy was talking about? If you stick with what Guy said, meaning it does not include any normative content that Michael was talking about, then probably somewhere between option 2 or 3, I'm fine with either of those. I don't remember what option number 1 was.
Number 1 was adopt the document as a working group item.
Oh, I thought that was what number 2 was.
No, number 1 was adopted as a working
sorry.
group
Okay.
item.
1 or 3, I don't have a preference between those 2 as long as the scope is right. I don't have enough information to actually have an opinion between those. And I would say Michael's option is actually a third one, which is 1, 3, or 4, but not 2. 2, I think, should be, so the architecture document should be very generic, and this has a bunch of specific things in there. There are pieces of this that actually do reflect and are already in the 2 sample architecture documents, and Hank is nodding, but I don't think more details at the level of this one goes in the architecture document, is my opinion. So.
Yeah, this is Hank.
Hold on, Kathleen is on the.
Oh, sorry. Hi, guys.
Hi. So just to clarify, if this is adopted as informational, I just want to make sure I heard what Roman said correctly. It wouldn't get published anyway? And are we looking at the architecture and use cases not getting published?
No, sorry. I was reacting to, we were talking about this as a potential use case document, and I was just rereading the charter here and reminding us that the way we wrote the charter is that the use cases do not get published.
Okay, all right. No, I think this goes a little bit more into detail than the use cases. So without any hats, I do support it being adopted, informational or getting merged somehow, but I think I also agree with Dave that it doesn't quite fit the specificity of it into the architecture document. But it's good work.
Yeah, as I think I have to agree with Kathleen. We shouldn't not lose the content. And Michael, I think, brought a very good, which is option 4. We have the option to create profiles that are implementation specific refinements of the architecture that help you to actually implement all the parts for a specific domain. This concept is called the profile of the architecture, but there can be a better term of this. It is literally using the building blocks to define a complete solution for your domain of application. And that is very helpful. RILF is a explicit domain of application for the for RATs, and therefore it could be used as a first try out to create such a solution document. Again, profile being a working title of the architecture.
Okay, so I think we're done with this discussion since I said 4 minutes. We're now into 5. So what I'm hearing from the working group is that more clarity on the intent of the document from the authors is needed. So Guy and Jess, maybe we can take it offline, but I still encourage feedback on the document from the group. But recommendation and guidance, Guy and Jess, is to help the group get more clarity onto the intent moving forward with the draft. Okay?
Okay, thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
I do have comments from Dave, which I will incorporate. I didn't happen in time for this, but we will respond to that.
Okay.
Thank you, Dave.
So, okay, with that, we can move on to the architecture.
Design team.
Yeah, so for those who may not have been monitoring the mail list closely, we up until, anyway, for a few weeks, we have had a lot of discussion on the mail list because there are now 2 different drafts that speak to a RATS architecture. It appeared from the chair's view that we were not going to reach consensus. So from that standpoint, as chairs, we defined an editorial/design team to come up with an architecture draft, with a new architecture draft that can be used for the for RATS. So in the design team, we have Dave Thaler, Hank Burkholtz, Michael Richardson, and Ned Smith. So they have met, and they, I think, 3 side meetings
3.
this week. And so I asked them to report out on the progress and path forward. And so Dave, I guess, drew the short straw and is presenting the results.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy. Yeah, so we met once during the hackathon, and we met on Tuesday morning, and then again on Thursday morning. And so Thursday morning, we actually went over these slides. I don't think that they've changed other than the editors or the people in the design team that sent me corrections, I think are all in here. And so let's go ahead and get started. Oh, where you got to go into full screen mode, Nancy. All right, rolling.
Sometimes you have to do it twice.
All right.
There you go.
Okay. So the first question was actually posed on the list by, I think it was Jurgens months ago. So the first question is the architecture document intended to be informational or standards track? Because there are actually across different working groups there exist precedents both ways. And so we asked the chairs, and at least one of the chairs said informational please, because the charter doesn't actually say. And so this is a question for the working group. If there's any objections to that, let us know. But otherwise, the editors are in agreement. And so that is what we're working with right now, unless we're told otherwise. Okay. After we got past that, which was in the Sunday meeting, then the next question was, well, and this is kind of the question that Jurgen raised, which is, I see 2119 language in a document that I thought might be informational. Is that appropriate? And so we actually had this discussion that says, well, do we actually want to use normative language in this architecture document, given it's informational or not? Because again, there's multiple precedents both ways across different architecture documents and other groups, okay? And so in that discussion, when talking about 2119 language, must, should, may, one of the questions is, if you use it, then who is your audience? Are these must, shoulds, mays that are meant for implementers? Or are they meant for, say, admins that deploy it, or are they meant for spec writers? Okay, and so usually you pick one or perhaps more. That's a little bit more complicated of those. And so after a bunch of discussion, our straw man proposal, which happens to match the same discussion we had an equivalent discussion in the TEEP working group on Wednesday, the TEEP architecture with exactly the same questions. And the TEEP architecture discussion had the same conclusion that we talked about in the straw man proposal here, which is that we believe as editors that normative language is best in standards track or BCP documents. And so if you pick informational, but it is most convenient to not use normative language. And so non-normative advice can be done without 2119 language, right? We can say the same things and just not use the must, should, may language. We can just say the same things in just normal English, okay? And so this is what we propose as the answer to Jürgen's question. Unless there's any objections, we're just going to do this, okay? All right. This is the process that we're planning to follow for creating the new architecture document based on the 2 previous ones and any contributions we receive from, lists or pull requests or whatever. We have already created a GitHub repository. Thank you, Nancy, and Hank did the first strawman check-in, or the first skeleton check-in. So the process is as follows, and if you're a TEEP person who happens to be in the room, this is the same process that we've been following in TEEP for 2 years or something, okay? Different working groups work differently in GitHub. Given the overlap between TEEP and RATS, we're proposing to use the same process that we're using in the TEEP working group, which is anyone can file issues in GitHub, okay? If you want to make sure we don't lose it, you can post it to the list, but if you want to make sure we don't lose it, it's helpful to file a GitHub issue. Otherwise, the authors or editors can file those for you, which can also happen. So it's not an obligation that you can't submit feedback without filing an issue. No. We're just going to use that as the tracking mechanism. If you send it and we think there's an issue, then sure, I'll go ahead and file the issue for you if you don't. So
The word caution there is it may take longer.
yes, this is true, but at least we don't miss anything. So yeah, that's why feel free to give us feedback if you don't like this process. But this is, so for pull requests, the authors or anybody else, anybody in this room or listening or reading the minutes is welcome to file pull requests, which then allows people to review it and comment on specific lines far more easily than tracking stuff in email where it's harder to figure stuff out and track things. So it's a great tracking process. The authors, those 4 people, will review the pull requests and merge if the authors agree. But the GitHub issues would be closed by chairs once they verify that, yep, they think that the editors did the right thing or at least followed the right direction. And of course, new issues can always be filed after that, right? But so authors merge and chairs close. And so in future RATS meetings, we'll just reference issues by GitHub numbers where they exist to make things easier to track. Okay.
If you want to ask for comments on that one?
If you have comments, feel free. Otherwise, I'm just going to go on unless there's objections. Yeah.
I have a question.
All right. Clarifying questions, welcome.
Hank, you're tall. This is Elliot. The question is simply relating to consensus and working group consensus, which is where is that represented in this process?
I'm going to give you the TEEP answer in the hopes that that it will be representative of what the chairs would say for RATS. The TEEP answer is that it happens here at the chairs close GitHub issues step. And of course, the check on that is eventually there's a working group last call that would be after that new issues can come up. And so consensus happens when working group last call says that there's consensus on the document.
Okay, so you're not going to try and gain consensus on individual issues?
On individual issues, that is the job in the TEEP working group. The chairs would not close.
It's the text that I'm worried about. So
Yeah.
it says authors you review and
Correct.
agree.
The
not
authors
working
is just a
group.
design team proposal, right?
Okay.
And so the chairs can say, do they believe it's consensus? They could choose to keep an issue open for multiple IETF meetings and whatever they want. That's up to the chairs, okay? And so the authors would just merge and leave it to the chairs to determine consensus. Michael,
so I'm not going to rock the boat on what you're doing because I'm willing to give it a go. My experience is that GitHub is awesome for the design team discussion because we can share a screen in our group, discuss it, and we can actually bash the text in front of our eyes and agree on that thing. I find it's less useful. It's great when I'm going to say end users, people not in the design team, open the issues to record them. I find it's less good for actually getting their consensus agreement from there. And so I would say to Elliot that my approach would always be to email back on the list to say, we believe that we've solved your problem in the following way. Here's the diff, okay, and creating the thread that allows them to agree or disagree without necessarily going back to GitHub, because I find that we lose the drive-by opinions
Exactly.
that would
Yeah.
otherwise not have bothered to look and didn't realize we were
Right.
solving something.
So the clarification and the reality, sorry.
I strongly agree with Michael.
Right.
That actually is,
The-
thank you
the
for summarizing that.
Yeah, the reality, Elliot, is we go through, especially in the face-to-face meetings, we go through, even if the chairs have closed them, we go through the issues as we go through the revision updates. Right.
So I think Elliot's not on the mic, but I think the part of Michael's main point, if I got it right, which I agree with, right, is that for back and forth discussion on the list to get consensus on text, that's better done across email rather than as a bunch of comments inside the GitHub issues. It's okay either way, but Michael's saying it's actually better as normal list discussion, and that's the part that I said I actually agree with that. And so thank you for summarizing that, Michael.
Yeah. Lawrence Lundblade, we can take this later if you want,
Yeah.
but I was going to ask about the pace of publishing drafts and what the decision points there, if there's anything in that.
We haven't had a discussion among editors, and so if you have a request, we are listening. Just between the four of us, we didn't actually ask that question as to how often do we want to publish submit an internet draft versus working off of the GitHub copy. Great question. I don't have an answer personally. I would confer with the chairs and go along with what other people want. So, all right. Since that was a question, not a request to follow a process, I want to keep going and get to technical points here. So we have time to get to technical stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So discussion of use cases. Okay. Both of the individual submissions around architecture do cover use cases with text that is adapted from Michael Richardson's use cases document that was not intended for RFC. So both versions actually do pull in some things. In his document, there's actually two categories of things without using a term for those things. There are solution agnostic scenarios, and again, I'm making up terms here, and there are things that are solution specific mechanisms, and you can see examples and things there that are solution specific that it walks through. They're actually in two different sections, and so the question is, should the architecture document include either of those two categories, right? And so the precedents from both of the individual submissions are that category 1 is included in the architecture document, category 2 is not included in the architecture document, okay? And so this is a question because by default, we will follow the same thing since all the editors were kind of used to that in either document, unless the working group wants a different answer. And like if you don't want category 1 in the architecture document at all, let us know. Nancy did suggest moving the use cases to an appendix, and both of the contributions there in the main body towards the top were open to that discussion as well. Again, by default, we'll default to what the editors did on the source documents, but if the working group has direction, this is not a technical issue, right? So we should time box any comments on this one. But
Easy time boxing. Hi, this is Henk. I just wanted to highlight that Jürgen Schumwelder wanted to have use cases early on next to the terminology and not in the appendices in order to catch the reader's eye, so that it is easy for a new reader of the document to identify himself with the architecture document. Same goes with the message flow diagrams that we have in order to create this feeling, okay, I can find myself in here. Again, this was just one information or a comment about the structure of this document, and we can, of course, sure put them in the appendix, but there's benefit to both approaches.
Right. So those are our three options. Keep it where it is in the body, move it to the appendix, or have them not be in the draft. Currently, they are in the body. I don't know if we want to even ask the question right now or just say, if you have opinions, please send them to the list.
I would just move
Okay.
on.
Moving on. Let's actually get to the technical topics here. Okay. In attestation, you have entities that need to trust other entities, and that means you have to have some way of provisioning that initial trust relationship. Okay. Currently, the establishment of the trust relationship is not attestation itself, and so the solutions for establishing that are currently treated as being out of scope of the RATS working group for the solutions, but the existence of trust establishment and the relationship to attestation, how you provision it, is in scope. You have to describe the end-to-end thing in the architecture, and so the current belief is that we should talk about it in the architecture, but not go into solution details. There's no solution documents because that's out of scope for the working group. Well, we at least have to describe the relationship and the expectations around what would be there. Okay. And so here's examples of things that's in the trust model section in the Thaler architecture as to who trusts whom, and this is the style of stuff that would be in the architecture document when we combine stuff. Okay? So you can see so-and-so trusts so-and-so, and who, let's see, there's a term here on other slides and stuff. We've been using the term asserter, but a bunch of people were claiming that asserter was confusing. I was one of them, but a bunch of people on the list said that, and so among the authors, we are now going to use the term endorser for the entity that sends endorsements. Okay. And potentially other things besides endorsements. Yeah, yeah. In other words, this is just a rename of this term to that term because asserter was found to be confusing between things that generate assertions could be other of those roles, and this is, and so on. And so that's just a highlight that we're planning to change that. And so the endorser, formerly the attester, right, is often a manufacturer that imprints key material into the attester. But it could also be some other entity that provisions key material later on if there's a way to do that. And for example, some documents use the term voucher for this. Okay, so I'm saying this is the style of discussion that would be in the combined document.
Okay, there's
Okay,
a
Kathleen.
question.
Yep.
Hi, I am the Jabber Scribe because apparently there isn't one in the room. So I don't know if you're taking Jabber Scribe comments.
Akira?
Akira is in the back.
There's been a bunch and they haven't been done before. So if you want me to just.
Okay.
If you would like to relay, Kathleen, go ahead.
Yeah.
Thomas Harjano, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, yes, needs to state trust relationship, for example, business and legal relationship without stating solutions.
Yep. That is the proposal. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to keep going then. Thank you. All right. Next topic. This is, all right. So there was a bunch of previous discussion around background check and passport models. And of course, we should keep in mind that models are just models. There's no intent that models is like prescriptive or by way of limitation. They're a useful way to describe things so that when we're talking about things, we have some reference things, just like the interaction model discussion, right? You don't have to do it that way, but here's a reference, okay? And so bottom point, models are intended to be representative, not necessarily complete or limiting. Please keep that in mind, okay? So there was a discussion that the RIV document triggered that was about verifier-initiated attestation. And exactly how that fits into the background, into the models and whether we need a new model and so on. And so one of the discussions at the hackathon, we said, well, would it be useful to describe what the use cases are, or maybe you'd have a different term than use cases, what the motivations are for having verifier-initiated things. And so here's two examples that came up in that meeting or in the hackathon discussion at the TRATS table. And so example number one, and this is summarizing but abstracting what's in the RIV document, right? So the first one is, as an example, the network notices some anomalous traffic that comes from a device and says, something suspicious here. Maybe I should find out what its attestation or posture status is right now. And so it proactively goes out to query that thing to say, hey, you still healthy? Or did something happen? Okay. And an example of another case that may have happened is, so the health may have changed since it was last attested. Okay, maybe it rebooted or something got installed or whatever. Okay, so this is agnostic as to whether it's TPM based or anything else. It's saying I got to reach out and say, hey, did something change? What's your current status? Something was odd. Second example is the network hasn't noticed anything that's odd, but it wants to go off and do that anyway. Maybe it does it periodically, or maybe the network's definition of what's healthy has changed. So if you're using reference values, maybe your set of reference values changed, and now you need to go and re-query and recompare, that kind of thing, okay? And so those are two examples of where you might want to do attestation that was initiated by somebody other than the attester. So you got to reach out to the attester. So that's the case here. In my document, the 01 version, added this picture, which was derived off of a picture in RIV. And so in this example, right, the attester talks to a relying party, which talks to a verifier, which then needs to go and get the evidence via some other mechanism and generate some result. This is just one of many variations. Again, this is not prescriptive. Your variation may vary from this picture. Okay. So the point is that well, first of all, there's this notion of out-of-band conveyance or in-band conveyance, or pick your favorite term, right? So in-band conveyance means attestation is communicated across whatever other protocol between the attester and the relying party is already using, right? So if a attester is trying to use HTTP or OPC-UA or COAP or whatever it is, in-band means you're doing attestation across the same protocol, whether you're passing evidence or attestation results, may vary, right? You're just passing claims across some existing message. That would be in-band, okay? Out-of-band means you're using some other protocol than the one that you're naturally using to access the relying party, okay? So the next two slides show 4 different categories of solutions with example diagrams. Again, before I go on to the next slides, right? The diagrams are not synonymous with the categories. Each diagram is an example of something in the category. Everybody got that? Okay. So the definition is the category text, not the diagram. Don't beat me up on the diagrams. They're examples of categories. Okay. Okay, great. I see you nodding. Thank you. Okay, now I can actually show the diagrams. Focus on the text. So the diagrams are in case you don't understand the text. Okay, here we go. First example is the verifier queries the attester over IP, right? So netconf is an example of this, right? So the verifier sends off a message to the attester and comes back. And of course, this is at some point in time, other things are happening too, but the main focus is the exchange over here, right? The verifier reaches out and touches the attester, okay? And so we'll go through these, we'll see none of these categories are perfect, right? Every category has some disadvantage, which is going to motivate, there is no one size fits all, okay? So the first one, the example is, well, it doesn't work if there's like a firewall or something inside here that the verifier can't just reach out and touch the attester, right? This assumes that you actually have a server piece that's actually reachable on the attester, okay? But if you do that, then of course, yes, this category works fine. Second category is where the verifier can reach out and touch the attester underneath IP. So maybe there's some EAT messages or something. So this is just showing you got some long, low-level channel that's sending the same type of messages across, okay? And of course, this doesn't work on all link layers. It only works on link layers that use that particular, below IP mechanism, right? Okay, so that's second category. Here's the third category, which says the relying party just gives like a referral or a notification that says, hey, please reach out and contact verifier X. You're not going to get any farther until you pass the information to him, okay? And so in this case, well, this doesn't necessarily work with all these protocols because this depends on you being able to pass this referral, which may be an extra message that didn't exist or something, right? So this is like a referral or a pass. I don't have an example there. I don't know if there is one, but it is a possible category. Not shown on this diagram. They should have those extra. All the other ones have these dashed arrows here.
Where did the results
Yeah, you see these dashed arrows here. That's not intentional. That arrow there should be over there too. Okay.
And that's an answer to where did the results come back?
Yeah. So it could be, for example, remember these diagrams are examples. It should be 1, 2, 3, 4. Or it could be 1, message comes up, 2, 3, 4. There's lots of different variations of this, right? Okay. But yes, sorry, my bad. That little arrow should be between there too. All right. And the fourth category is the attester keeps some persistent connection open with the verifier over IP, such as, a WebSocket or pick your favorite protocol. So there's a connect in the outbound direction that happens, say, at boot time or whatever. And then some later time, whether it's immediately or much later on, there's some query or subscribe or whatever it is, such that later there's an evidence here. Okay. And so there's maybe a time delay between certainly a time delay between 1 and 3, and whether 2 happens at the time of 1 or 2 happens at the time of 3 may vary by solution. Okay? So like WebSockets, right, the query may happen at a much later time, but for something like pub sub, the query may happen immediately on connect, and the pub happens way later. Okay.
Dave, question,
Yes.
just clarifying question on this. So this would be,
That was Elliot, by the way.
this is Elliot.
Elliot
sorry.
Lear.
So this would be in the case where it's happening in the application protocol and in-band within the application, and as far as
In-band is always the line that's horizontal at the bottom. This is the in-band stuff. This is at the bottom here. Anything that's this vertical lines over here, the diagonal lines is all the out-of-band stuff. So this is some other protocol besides the normal resource access protocol.
So the one
All 4 of these are in the out-of-band
okay.
section.
Okay.
None of these are in the regular in-band ones is what's shown in the classic slides for background check and passport model. Those are the in-band ones. These are other variations that are the out-of-band variations. We have more of a triangle type relationship. Okay. which the RIV document does have one of these triangle relationships, and there's many different variations across different solutions you could construct that fits in this category. So I thought it would be useful to have this style of discussion in an architecture document, taking into account whatever feedback people have for us. Okay. Everybody okay? All right, I'm going to keep going then. All right, next topic. Okay,
Can you
Jabber.
get up? Oh,
Before I
Jabber?
move on, Jabber, really?
Jabber question? Can you get on the mic or?
From Thomas. Can Atesto dump signed evidence at local stores to be pulled in later by verifier?
Yes,
The answer is yes, just out of band.
yes.
Yes, out of band.
That would be another variation. I said all these are just examples of categories. That would be another example in one or more of these categories, yes.
Michael, David, it occurs to me as you're discussing the in-band and out-of-band mechanisms, it occurred to me that whether or not we want to distinguish between cooperative and uncooperative in-band solutions, ones where essentially we can and the protocol owners wish to extend their protocol to add communications for attestation, and ones where we have to do things like hide the attestation in a certificate extension that the protocol doesn't really know it's carrying, and sort of it's uncooperative, right? But the two ends are going to probably pull it out and do something. So it's like I don't know what the right word is, hiding. It's an encapsulation, but it's a hack, really, okay? And so I wonder whether that is a worthwhile attribute to a use case to say, well, we're having to work around an existing protocol, and that's why we might do something weird. I don't know if that's worth a comment or a category. I don't know. Just throwing that out there.
No, thank you. Yes, I understand the distinction. Yes, the distinction is important. I don't know yet whether it belongs in the architecture. So far, what I'm hearing from you makes me lean towards yes, but I have to think more and see if there's any reason for no, because yes, I understand the distinction, and it's been useful for protocol discussion, say in the Microsoft document series, we actually have terms for the difference that you have there. So if other people have an opinion on that, let me know, but yes, great point.
Well, Michael, you're part of the editorial team
I am.
too, so.
Yeah.
you just-
Right.
Yeah.
This is,
No,
if anybody
fair-
other
fair
than an
point.
editor has an
Yeah.
opinion, let the editors know. Yeah. Okay.
Good point.
Moving on to the next topic. Relationship among formats. Again, many of this discussion has already happened, but this is our attempt to say, we believe the architecture document needs to have a discussion. This is the style of discussion that we think is high level enough to belong in the architecture document. Are we on the right track, right? That's the intent of me showing this, is to not really tell you, hopefully, things that you don't necessarily already know, but to say, this is what we believe belongs in the architecture document, is this style of information, okay? Evidence, attestation results, and endorsements are three types of conceptual messages. They can all have different claims formats. And so I'm not going to show the endorsements in this slide because it wouldn't fit. And so between attesters and verifiers, there can be many different formats. And this is only showing ones that are either standard or at least potential standards from different organizations right now. And on the right, between verifiers and underlying parties, same thing. And again, there's ... because there exists many proprietary formats that are not in here right now. So for example, Intel's SGX format is not a standard and would go in this ... So that's an example of a proprietary format. Okay. And so the point is, there's many of these, there's many of these. The ones on the left for any particular path may be different from the ones on the right. This was what was in Lawrence's presentation in the first RATS meeting where we talked about this in the e-presentation. Okay. This continues on from the previous slide. And so saying, if we're going to use attestation with existing protocols, right? Because the things on the left, in some cases, evidence might be in band in some variations, and in other variations, attestation results might be in band. So evidence is in band in the background check model, attestation results is inbound in the classic passport model, and so all those are possible. And so it says, if you are using in band, like in an existing protocol, then this affects how we explain things, as well as some constraints on things that solutions have to take into account if they're doing in band. Okay. So, for example, since you need to be conveyed inside an existing protocol, this is what Michael was just talking about. You convey it in a way that that protocol is aware of, like you're extending the protocol, or you're conveying it in a way that the existing protocol is unaware of, and so you're kind of using that protocol as a transport, right? Those are the two terms I mentioned that we use, is we use extension versus transport. You can pick better terms, but those are the terms that we're using right now inside Microsoft for those two concepts. And so some existing protocols constrain the set of formats. And so if you're going to use it as a transport or encapsulation, so as an example of one that constrains, OPC UA only supports, you got to make it look like an X509 or encapsulate it inside of an X509 in order to pass it. Okay. And so what that means is that any particular solution fits into one of three categories, at least I couldn't think of a fourth. So the first one is to say, whatever the native protocol uses, right, you use that format for claims. Okay, so if it passes X509, you do it as X509 extensions. If you're using HTTP, you can put it in a bearer token. You can use it JWT or a CWT or whatever, because that's native, right? Second category is I could take the claims in whatever format I want and then encapsulate them in the other format, right? So I could add an X509 extension that has a CWT, or I could add a CWT claim that has a JWT, or I could add a JWT claim that has a TPM thing, or whatever it is. Okay, so that's the encapsulation mechanism. This one is more problematic for constrained nodes because you need multiple parsers, right? And so people have talked about, I want to do this all with only one parser and my constrained node not have multiple parsers. So, and so that, again, for example, that's why people like CBOR, is if in the constrained node you're already using CBOR, then I don't have to do encapsulation. I don't have to have an ASN1 parser or something else too. The third category is to do out of band, right? Which is use some other protocol to acquire the claims, okay? And so this just requires multiple protocols. More messages and latency are typical in out of band. Maybe you can find ways to optimize that. And so out of band ones might be more problematic for constrained networks or nodes, okay? And so the point is, any particular solutions, you just say which category it's in and what the domain of applicability is or its assumptions. Okay? But generally, as far as I know, solutions tend to fit into one of those three categories. The fact that we have multiple formats, especially like multiple native formats, is why this motivates, and we think that having the architecture document explain the motivation for an information model is important. And so the fact that you have to, for in-band ones, there's a desire to use native formats for things is why you have arguments for all these things on the left or on the right, depending on which model it is. And so that's why having information is useful, and that's the type of argument we can make in the architecture document that then justifies why it would then informatively reference an information model document.
This is Hank referring from the Jabber. Monty Weisman highlights that this working group is intended to be rechartered for phase 2. And in this second phase, there would be, okay, now I trust the hardware. Now let me check your firmware software and then do the attestation. So there's this role of the endorser that is a little bit of in the background now. We only talk about it. We'll then very prominently use the same in-band, out-band thingies as we are describing here, and we should be able to reuse all this concept in the second phase in order not to make them return again.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right. All right, Lawrence, I see you coming in at the light.
Yeah, Lawrence Lundblad. I don't know how far you want to go into the details of this discussion.
You mean now we're in the document?
Yeah, now, I think, yeah.
Well, okay, I'm going to do the time check. You
Yeah.
have 6 minutes left.
Okay. Then I'd like to go on.
You have 3 more slides
Yeah.
after this.
Okay, all right.
So if you have detailed stuff, send it to the list or follow up afterwards.
Yeah.
If you have something extremely high level and less than 15 seconds, feel free.
So
I'll comment just,
Okay.
I think this needs to be addressed, but it seems that there's a lot of things that need to be thought through here. And
Yep.
like you don't mention signing formats, which is a gating thing here, what the hardware can sign and stuff like that.
So it's a question of how much detail needs to be
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
architecture.
right.
So again, just to reiterate the process, we're going through all this. There is a GitHub repo.
Yeah.
So Lawrence, for any of these, you can
File an issue or
File
send a
an
message to the
issue.
list and we'll file it. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's even an issue of the architecture. It's an issue of what drafts and what documents and what formats we're going to decide what we're going to do
So
as a
that's
whole.
different
Right,
than this
that's out of scope
discussion.
for this presentation then. That's a charter
Yes.
item discussion. All right. Next topic is about claims profiles, which we have talked about the need for, but there's nothing that actually specifies any requirements of the existence of it in a document. And so we said the architecture document should explain the concept of a claims profile and any architectural expectations around the creation of claims profiles. Okay. And so the point is there's many different use cases or relying parties. Different relying parties expect different things in different claims. So for example, in TEEP, the TAM is a relying party that has very specific claims that are necessary or expected by the TAM. So therefore it needs a claims profile. And so a claims profile, there's a short sentence on the slide here proposing a strawman definition and a process that we have talked about at a previous IETF. I think last time we said that claims profile should be done by the group that owns the use case, whether that's this group or TEEP or some other working group, because there's different use cases. And there's various precedents in terms of how DHCP options and Yang modules and stuff is done. So we could do a claims profile in here, but other groups over time will do their own claims profiles is our expectation. And so we would say something like this in the architecture document, unless there's a more natural place to put it. Certainly existence of claims profiles, the process may or may not belong in here. I don't know yet. Okay. Testing multiple components. This is a topic that also came up last IETF where we were in Montreal. And so we believe that the architecture document needs to have a discussion about testing multiple components and how different, I'm going to use the word claim sets because I don't know a better term for the sake of this discussion. A particular piece of evidence or attestation results or whatever may have claims from multiple components in the same device. There are concepts attesting and attested environments that have been discussed a lot that I'm not going to repeat now because I think we're familiar with those terms. But these can be chained or layered. So for example, in a DICE certificate chain, right, the hardware attests the firmware, which then attests the OS, which then attests the app. So if this is in a TEE, for example, this might be, trust zone and trusted firmware and opt-t and some trusted application. And so what you have is a cert chain where each entity is the attested environment for the previous leg and the attesting environment for the next leg. And so you get this chain of stuff, each with its own set of claims. Okay. Another example is where, so this is a linear relationship example. Then there are one-to-many relationships. And here's a bunch of examples here of a case where you have a single environment that attests multiple, what's the term that we used on Wednesday? Submods or something as an example. And so there's a bunch of examples here. So this notion that you have a root and various links between things as opposed to just a tested environment and a tested environment. Okay. Can be more complex relationships. And so in general, you have this tree of components. Each entry in the tree of components in the evidence or attestation results can have its own claim set with its own information in it. Okay. Comment from Jepper?
Yeah, on Japper from Thomas. Also need to verify to ask for only subset of claims. Not really understanding.
Okay.
So I think it's also need to allow verifier to ask for only the subsets of the claims.
Okay, good point. Let's make sure that appears in the minutes so I don't have to listen to the recording. Or at least between the editors, one of us will remember that. Okay, thank you. All right. So the next steps is we have GitHub merges work in progress. And so our next steps are to try to take the information we've received so far and submit a new draft in the hopes that the chairs will approve it as a working group document. And that's why my title slide had the proposed new file name, which is Draft IETF RATS Architecture.
Do you have a timeline for when you might have a new draft?
I'm looking at the other editors. No, not yet, but we'd like one. Yes. Soon.
Okay. At some point, I need.
Not
think-
before Thanksgiving.
Well, Thanksgiving was in October, so what's the problem? No, so
Says Canada. Yes.
so I think we need a week to regroup, have start a frequent editorial design meeting. So next week is Thanksgiving, right?
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so that's already done. So I would say that what I imagine is that we would post absolutely a new rev, a week or two, middle of December, okay, and then probably post a new document every month or so, okay, because integers are cheap.
Sounds good to me.
That sounds like a good cadence.
Okay.
Okay.
That's assuming that we get adequate participation from the list and
Yeah.
on the GitHub.
Okay, great job. Okay, so thank you, Dave. Thank you, architecture editorial team. We'll look forward to reading the new draft. And with that, let's move on to the Yang module. You want the clicker?
Yeah, clicker good. Hi, I'm Henk. Hello, room. Hello, group. This is an update about the feedback from the list and what we did about it with respect to the Yang module. I'm the presenter for a lot of people. The list is large, as you can see. So there was some need for clarification how, why, and in which form we are using the Yang module or the Yang in general in the concept and the scope of RETS, the remote attestation procedures here. To give a quick overview, Yang modules in general are written data models as a specific language to write them. These data models describe data at rest, but they also come with a certain set of APIs for conveyance. In this case, we use them for remote attestation. This module we have here uses a specific secure element. It is the TPM. The TPM has a very well-defined interface. That is why it is so popular, and that is why it's often used. Please let me highlight that a TPM is not always a physical TPM, and it can be a so-called FTPM, which is a basically TPM running in a TEE or some other shielded execution environment that is Turing complete, and it's basically called a firmware TPM. Also, there can be virtual TPMs. Those run in hypervisor DOMs and are accessible for VMs, for example. So they are all using the same interface. They can all then have the source for the data store as a Yang module. This is important background here. We would like to be a little bit more agnostic about this, and not using only this interface, but this is super common, as even other SDOs tend to use the TPM interface because it is there and it maps to their needs. So if we have another fully complete interface to another ESE or the hardware security model, we could make this module a little bit more hardware agnostic. But please, again, let me remind you, the hardware agnosticness is already gone. It is abstracted by the interface to the TPM. The Yang module always comes with an English description. So it's like a tree, and it is treated as statements. The Yang calls all these elements statements. Every statement requires you, it's mandatory to have a semantic description of the statement. Otherwise, you cannot post it as a coherent Yang module and the data tracker. As a yin and yang sign, it goes red and says, no, this is not good. You forgot description text. And finally, I was already talking about APIs. There are a lot of encodings here. They're called encodings in Yang. Some people call them serializations for the protocols that are already used. They're using all the same operations, same APIs abstractly, but the conveyance serialization is XML, JSON, or CBOR. The corresponding protocols are called netconf, restconf, and coreconf at the moment. So there was one big item about conveyance of the various formats that we create here, and the most prominent, say, in-band, out-band agnostic format that we have is EAT. EAT is a CWT with could be a very big set of claim sets to express both attestation evidence and potential other profiles later on, as Dave was highlighting in the architecture slide before. So we propose as it was requested on the list, to have a very simple and opaque conveyance method in our Yang module for eats. That is relatively easy. The only thing to prove is the important thing is to prove freshness. So we have an RPC, the tiny X in front of this tree representation represents an RPC. This RPC would input a nonce that would be reused in the creation of a eat. So we assume the eat is always created recently, and freshness is proven by the inclusion of the nonce that is cryptographically signed into the eat. This is a rather simple RPC, so to speak, but Yang-wise speaking. I was speaking to two Yang doctors, and if this is an additional thing to the old semantics you always have with the other RPCs, this is okay. This is a convenience RPC to convey the same information in a very common data serialization that you have in your working group supervision space. And now Michael goes to the forum.
Go ahead, Michael.
Michael Richardson. So for those with vision problems, it says RPC, not RFC.
Yes.
So it's not a separate document, it's a separate call.
Yes,
Okay.
it is a separate
Some of
call
us have,
in the Yang module.
have, that the
Not
little,
a typo.
not a typo is the
No.
point. Okay. I was like, huh? Oh, yeah, another document. I'm all for another document. Okay. That makes
Just
it really
another
simple.
RFC,
Right.
is not our attempt.
And so then I realized that wasn't what you proposed. So, so given that it is another RPC, and want to make sure that people in the room understand that Yang describes mostly RPC type things, but some of us, but some of us are more familiar with using it to describe data at rest, but that's not how it was originally envisioned. And this is an RPC mechanism, not a data at rest mechanism. Okay, it's just an important point to make for people that may have come to Yang in different ways. So my question is, does the resulting challenge response, which is the EAT thing, does it depend or contain any of the values which we would have found through any of the other data model interfaces to the TPM? Is there any relationship to what's here to what's in the rest of the piece of the doc?
Not yet. At the moment, a EAT can only include what is the EAT draft defines. So if you define a catch-all TPM structure claim, for example, which I would not recommend in this way, just a strong proposal here, then yes, but per definition, an EAT can only contain what is defined for EAT.
Fair enough. Fair enough. That doesn't answer my question, because as far as I know, and from reading your document, the rest of the Yang model, TPMs have things like an uptime value, which we have an EAT claim for.
Yeah, I have made a small comparison of a few claims. This is assertions then actually, semantic identical things that are in both worlds.
So would they be there? Would they be there in that thing? That's what I'm trying to.
No, it will not be the consensus. No, the tendency on the list was not to do this information model mapping, because it would be complicated and would require an information model that is not only in one document, but would be a global one. Because this semantic overlap you're describing here is just coincidentally in this module now and would span across a lot of things. We can do this. This is up to the group to decide. I personally am very agnostic to this. I would really like to see this mapping, because it makes interoperability way, way, way easier, but it has to be feasible.
Lawrence, so this looks pretty good to me. If you had a device that does EAT style attestation and not TPM style, it seems like this would be what you need if you wanted to talk to it with Yang. So this looks pretty good to me. The only addition I could see there is on the input side is being able to select which claims you want in the EAT.
Yeah, we can have something else exists in the Yang module. You could file an issue when this is adopted, because maybe this is close to adoption, I think, and then we can turn that in, but I can refer that topic to the NADL side. Yeah.
So Dave Taylor, on that topic, which is not why I got up here, I probably would want to see slightly more alignment on the information model stuff, so I'm not sure I'm going to give that. That's not what I got up here to say.
We're not talking information model. Yeah.
I don't want to call it information model. I'd like to see more overlap in claims like Michael was asking about. What I got up here to ask, and unless you have another slide on it, is how does the caller know which RPC to call?
How does the caller know which RPC?
How does the network management station or whatever that's the
The network management station knows the Yang module. Yang modules are distributed. The network client has it, and then you can create a corresponding request.
That's not my question. You've got two different RPCs in the same Yang module. You have the entity attestation token request and whatever the one that's TPM data.
This, there are already 5 RPCs in there. This is the 6th.
Right.
Again, when you have the Yang module, you have to make an administrative decision.
What is the expectation for the courier? Is he supposed to know a priori to making the call? Is he supposed to know whether there's a TPM or an EAT and he has to make the right call? How does he know which one of those two is in the other end? It's my question.
Okay.
The document doesn't talk about it because this one isn't in there yet, right? So.
That is correct. It is with every API that has multiple functions. How do you know which function of an API to call for your specific purpose?
Right. For this instance of that device, how do I know whether it's the kind that has a TPM or the kind that has an EAT? Which way? How do I know how to call it? Is my question.
Oh, this would be this information. Which information scope is in there will be in the RFC. Sorry, in the internet draft. The internet draft will highlight the scope just for the convenience of the reader and refer to the respective documents.
You still haven't answered my question.
I don't get your question. Please rephrase your question then.
How does it know? How does the caller of the RPC know? How does the caller of the Yang, how does the network management station know whether to ask the device for TPM information or to ask the device for EAT information? How does it make that decision?
I think this is a circular question, because if you implement this, you may have to make implementation choices. So if you are a conveyance, if you want to have a conveyance via EAT, you know that as an implementer or a management station.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
Shweta's on the line. She may be able to help.
Okay, yeah, Shweta,
Okay.
maybe you can.
Shweta?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. To answer Dave's question, I think it makes sense to. There are 2 ways to do it. One, they can use other models like the platform or inventory model to figure out whether the device supports TPM-based attestation or EATS-based attestation and call the RPC accordingly, which is complex. Or keep the EATS and TPM-based RPCs in 2 separate models so that the advertising device, which says support for a specific model, itself will be sufficient to determine which RPC to call.
You could add a feature statement. So the Yang module, you call it our capabilities.
Thank you for actually answering my questions with
Yes.
it. Please add the answers into the document, but thank you for understanding and answering my question.
Yeah.
So
So we're talking about capabilities here.
Yeah.
I didn't get that. So yeah, there's a feature option in Yang statements that can tell you which are the features provided by the Yang module. You can select by that.
Thank you,
Okay.
Shweta.
Sure.
Oh yeah. Having said that, so from the list, what you derive from the list is that one of the things that came up at the call for adoption is that how is this inclusion of these features actually going to work? And one of these questions basically is yours. How is it going to work now with another RPC? How do we know what can we request actually from the device? What is there? So this is not about the concept. It is more about how does Yang function in this concept. And sorry, the remaining, my voice is going away. This is Frank's. So the remaining, no, thank you. That's very nice of you. So our assumption is that the remaining proposals on the list are on the detail side and on the feature section. Sorry, it's really going away. And we were using the pull request in the official work group process as we provided them for team on Red's architecture already. Oh, wow, this is going fast. Maybe yes, yeah. Thank you.
This is Dave there. I'll stall for a second when you get your voice back.
Yeah.
My comment is actually a comment for Riv. In other words, I believe there's something that's not answered in your document, and I believe it's okay to not answer it in your document, which is how do you know the address of the device to query? Okay. I don't believe that's the responsibility of your document, but it is the responsibility of the other one to say how this fits into a workflow, which is there's stuff that happens that to give the larger context. So, hey, Riv document people, please take this into account and answer the question there, because I don't believe that this document is the place to answer my question, but I didn't have a place to naturally say that.
Thank you so much. Very kind of you. And,
I gave him-
very nice people, all of these people in the room. taking good care of me. So now, suitably equipped, I would come to the basically last point here. We had a discussion about, is the title appropriate? Because again, as we illustrated in the beginning, a lot of us using the TPM interface. Now, as we are introducing the EAT conveyance mechanism also, the counter comment on the list was maybe the name should stay. So actually, we're talking about content adoption here. How we added the title of the draft can be decided by the workgroup at any time before working group last call. So I think this is a no issue. We'll just see how the document develops and go from there. So this is my last point on this slide, I think. Yeah.
Well, do you have, is it a quick comment? Because then I'm going to ask the question. Okay.
No, questions are now,
I
please.
want to ask the adoption question.
My question is a scoping question, because it sounds like you believe that you're going to add the EAT stuff into there, right? We talked about how there's potentially a bunch of other formats. Is your intent to keep adding new formats over time, or to keep the scope constrained to a fixed set today, is my question.
My assumption is that there will be there will not be a zoo of other, let's call them representations or encodings we want to push here. The opaque RPC could be easily enumerating identities that can be vendor specific. We can add that, and then we are done with EAT and Yang here, and we have identities for other formats that can be vendor specific augments to this draft, and we are literally extensible then. That is a standard Yang method. This is frosting we haven't added yet because the RPC is kind of new, but yes, we would stop at the scope here, but allow for vendor specific or custom augments.
Okay, so sounds like you're saying, I'm just going to repeat back, I think the answer is you believe that we can stop at a fixed set as long as there's an extensibility mechanism for the vendor-specific stuff, and so we would have all the standard ones in here, in which case we might actually consider adding an X509, dice chain-based one, because that's not vendor extensible, and then maybe stop at the 4 or something that was on my slide, and the dot is one
that's nice.
No, you can always
That's a
add
fine
new ones
answer.
with another document, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to keep this open.
My question was the scope for this one, because he was asking about the title.
Fair point.
Yeah.
And you can keep the title as it is right now with your answer that says if it's all
It
the
allows-
standard ones plus an extensibility mechanism, then I think your title's fine.
And bringing dice into the mix here was a very good example of another way to do it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'm glad I did the first call for adoption, because it spurred well over 150 emails, only of which a handful besides the authors actually said, I approve the call for adoption. So, so from all of the feedback and now the discussions and the proposals that Hank and the authors have made, I think it is appropriate to leave it as the base Yang module. So with that, I didn't hear any, well, not here, I didn't read any strong objections to the draft itself. Michael's going to correct me.
I'm asking for clarification.
Okay, go ahead.
Michael, does the word, I'm going to leave it as the base Yang module, mean that there's not an EAT part in it?
No.
No. Okay.
No. I'm saying we're going to leave the title as is.
Oh, okay. Going to leave.
And
Okay.
because we're going to add the other stuff.
Okay.
Right. Because the original call for adoption was based on the first set of feedback, which was this draft is 2 p.m. specific. So perhaps it should just be titled as the Yang module specific for TPM. So with that, if we leave the title and knowing that what Henk has proposed with the addition of how you can incorporate EAT as an encoding, and we know that there's more work that needs to be done, much like what we said with EAT, does the group have any objection to adopting the current draft as a working group draft? And then we can actually allow people to put issues that we can track and formally discuss. So does the group object, again, to adopting the draft? Please hum if you are for adoption. Okay, just 1 second.
Yeah, you
Oh,
switched the
I
question.
did?
Yeah, sneakily. You were asking for objection first, and now you're asking for approval.
Yeah, okay, so let me rephrase it, sorry. What I meant to say was I didn't read any objections. So the question to be hummed is, do you approve for the working group to adopt this draft as a working group item? Please hum if you're in favor of adoption. Do we have any responses on the Jabber, Akira? Okay, so for the note takers, can you please note that there are many hummers on the Jabber as well? Okay, please hum if you do not want the working group to adopt this draft. Please hum now. Okay, I'm not even going to bother with it. So I didn't hear anything. Okay. Anything on the Jabber? Nope. Okay, so I think we have clear indication, but we will confirm that on the list. Okay, so finally, we can start tracking the issues. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for taking so good care of me. This is a new one. Thanks.
Wow, we're actually on time. Okay, so Wei, you're on.
Hi everyone, my name is Wei. I'm from Huawei. This is a new draft from Frank and me, and we want to bring the netconf pops up and the mechanism to the RAS to use it to extend the interaction procedure, interaction model. So for the interaction model, we now usually have the classic model, the challenge and the response model. It means that the verifier will first send a request to the attester, and then the attester respond with the evidence to the verifier. But it's kind of on-demand remote attestation, so it may not be suitable for a very large network. So we bring the young pops up and push mechanism here to see the other model is a publish and a subscription and push model. And first, the verifier can just subscribe to many devices to say that it wants to know the to do the remote attestation with these devices, and then the devices can periodically or on change to respond to send their claims evidence to the verifier. So it's more suitable for a large or a medium or large network, and it's our own change remote attestation. So the inherent benefits of YAM PubSub and the push mechanism is also suitable here: the flexibility, efficiency, scalability, and the filtering capability. The key points of our now draft are 3 parts. First is a subscription. We define that we now define you will subscribe the integrity evidence, and you can use the configure subscription or dynamic subscription, and you can define the selection filters. Next is a periodic push. The attester can periodically push his evidence claims to the verifier. It's more suitable for the general and the non-critical information collection, we think. The third is the on-change push or event-triggered push. It's more suitable for to monitor the critical integrity evidence when change happens. For example, like the new line cards are plugged in, and like some switch over, some kind of thing like that. The next is about the subscription parameters handling. The remote attestation subscription parameters are to enable the dynamic negotiation with the attester about what information the verified need and how to construct them together. It's originated from the challenging parameters. And generally, we think most of the parameters carried in a subscription message won't change during the remote attestation procedure. For example, like the hash signature algorithm you want to use and the TPM name. And the most difficult part is about the nonce. Nonce is for freshness validation, and it will be a little complicated in this situation. For now, the nonce is to ensure that we need to ensure that the nonce carried in every notification message is different for the security purpose. And both the attester and the verifier can know the correct values in advance. We have some possible solutions, for example, the timestamp or counter, and the same original seed and running same random function at both sides. Also, we considered the rest to the mechanism, but it's not very complementary or complete here. It's just we thought in the preliminary stage. Next, two examples. First is the configure subscription with on-change update trigger, and next is the dynamic subscription with periodic update trigger. About next steps, we know that the solutions may not very complete and may not quite suitable for every cases, but we want to keep on updates to complete it, and we want to get feedbacks from the group. Are you interested in it? Are you think it's a good direction to solve the problems? Valuable work.
Dave Taylor, on your points about freshness, I only understood half of that. You talked about counter and RNG, and I didn't understand how those provided freshness. I get the timestamp point, which I understand, which requires synchronized clocks and so on. But I didn't understand counters don't give you freshness unless they're using some mechanism that's not explained on the slide.
Oh, actually, we mean like the sequence number, like the counter. You send a message, and
if it's just a message sequence number, you have no guarantee of freshness then, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't know if that sequence number was used 3 days ago or something. That doesn't actually give you freshness, is my point.
Okay.
Okay, but the timestamp would. And so if you're only using mechanisms that, meaning protocol mechanisms that Yang already has, and you're saying, oh yeah, Yang has this pub sub model, it has the way to do that, and here's how to apply it to that, then I might ask, is this the sort of thing that could be combined into the basic Yang module document? Because it's just saying the data model is the same. It's saying here's a way to use some other Yang features in the following way, and it could just be a section in that document is what I'm trying to figure out. Because the use of pub sub sounds fine, especially if Yang just supports that, right? And saying here's what it means, and here's how you do the freshness point, which might require synchronized clocks, and unless you have some other RPCs to get the nonce or something like that would be another way I could envision doing that. And I'm looking at Hank, right?
Yeah, thank you, Ted. Yeah, thank you, Ted. So the three push drafts are basically intended to be pulled into data store modules that have we are doing a subscription to a data store, I think, and this data store subscription. We already we have the three. That's correct. We can apply that. There will be a lot of imports in some specific identities that tie to the red scope. But this is basically standard work how Yang works. Yes. So it is intended to do exactly what you have proposed.
Right. So thank you, Hank, for answering. So based on that answer, I would say I think this is interesting. I think it would be interesting if the authors would both think it makes sense for the concepts of pub sub to be pulled into the same document we just talked about adopting. Right. Now, for the freshness issue, I think that means you either need to assume like a 2 to south timestamps or have an RPC mechanism to say as a way to pass the nonce from the verifier to the tester. that could be added unless it's already in there, or if Yang has some other way to do that, which I don't know.
So creating a Yang module for Tutor is super easy. First of all, also I think so subscriptions are, yeah, this was after the last discussions of the last half year. Tutor was not my greatest priority, but we will get update again. And I think it's a hybrid here. You can initiate the subscription state with a single nonce and go from there, because the subscription state establishment is the Yang push is a handshake. And then from there, you can start with probably the timestamp-based telemetry. That is our assumption at the moment. Come back here if you have a question about this. Sorry.
We have time. I was going to give it 4 or 5 more minutes.
When using timestamps or even relative timestamps, like time since the subscription or whatever, as long as you have a way to solve clock drift, because you don't want to have attestation fail simply because you have two things that drift over time.
Okay.
Of course.
We're
yes.
talking about the pub sub. Okay. So.
Right. This is inherent in the pub sub saying,
Yes.
how do you get the nonce and the
Right.
freshness in the pub sub one? This is actually
Yeah.
the topic on this, to
Yeah,
say
yeah.
you
Right.
can put it in the same one, in the same document, which would be my preference from what I've heard so far.
Mhm.
But that means it needs this discussion of freshness, because the query response mechanism doesn't need it. It sort of gets it for free. And this would be adding a new constraint that's not there in the base document. And so that's why we need to discuss this. So.
Michael, I think that the nonce issue is in fact the issue for the pub sub.
Yes.
Okay. And so, the document should, that's essentially what it does. I don't have a specific solution, but the mechanism I was imagining is that I'm going to say the observer, the thing collecting the data, or the things collecting the data, that's maybe an interesting variation as well, would announce a new challenge to all the nodes, and that would be mixed in with something else that's unique to the node, and that would become the nonce. Okay, and the unique to the node is essentially becomes a one-to-one secret, and I don't know how to do that exactly yet, but what I'm saying is that's the thing I'm imagining somehow is there. And maybe we don't actually need to mix too many things, but that the challenge would be somehow broadcast on a frequent enough basis that you now would have something, which is a little bit essentially like having a secure time. It just doesn't increment. It's the result of some other. Yeah. So I don't know the exact answer to that, but I think that's the space that a document, once adopted by the working group, has to kind of shop around for some solution like that. Okay. We have to agree that we want to solve. I think that we agree
First
that
we need to agree. Yes.
Yeah, I think we have to agree that we want to solve the problem by adopting
Correct.
the document, at which point we can deal with the technical problem of this. And I think that is the technical problem that makes PubSub different than anything else.
So thank you for that, Michael, because that gets me to the next question. How many people have actually read the draft? Okay, I go ahead. Yeah, I think we need more readers and more reviewers and feedback. So I would encourage people to read this and then provide feedback. So the two questions that I'm hearing, or the two options that I'm hearing, basically three, is do we adopt the draft listing out whatever issues? Do we believe that the draft should be incorporated into the Yang module draft, or do we not address this at all? So as you're providing feedback, please do that over the mail list, and we'll get more feedback and an idea and guidance. Okay? All right. Okay, so with that, look at that. We actually have 10 minutes because, as I said earlier, I was going to hold my 15 minutes for call for adoption. So this is great. We have a little bit of guidance to provide to the authors of the RIF draft. We now have the base Yang module draft. So I will create the GitHub repo. So for those authors, you can rename it, put it in there. Okay. Okay, so orders of business.
It's much better, Michael, it's much better if they transfer their existing GitHub to you.
Yes, sorry.
Okay?
I need to clean up my language.
And
Yes.
and because if you create it, then it's all confusing, because that lets them keep all the issues, and it's the only way that lets them keep the issues and the
All I'm
settings.
doing is creating or giving them access to the RATS organization.
They're going to do a transfer, and you're going to say, I accept.
I think they have to be members of the organization.
They have to transfer to your organization, and then you will
I
accept.
learned something new, although Hank is an author and he already has access. So there. Okay. So, but thank you for that clarification, Michael. So it will become part of the RATS organization in the GitHub. So orders of business, we have good momentum. We now have a lot, 3 drafts that we can start working on, potential, two and the architecture. And Yang, that's 3, right? I think I can count 3. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to advocate for a minimum of 1 virtual interim. Is there interest to have 2? I see a lot of nods. So I will confer, You want me to do a hum? No, yeah. So what I'll do is confer with my co-chairs, and we'll put out doodle polls for the 2 virtual interims. I'm presuming that the first one should likely start in January, although Dave, you have a question or comment.
Dave Taylor is a TEEP chair.
Yes.
The TEEP working group was discussing having a virtual interim co-located with the hackathon that Nancy had the slide up in the session, which would be at the beginning of February, which would be a hackathon that would be joint TEEP, RATS, and SUIT. And one of the reasons TEEP was looking at that is because it was the hope that SUIT and RATS people would be readily available to participate in that. And so you might consider having a RATS virtual interim at the same time, either immediately afterwards or before or whatever. So I would think that would be a great
It'll
time
be either
frame.
the first one or the second one. So
No comment, no preference on those, but I'm saying that is a good date to have one.
well,
What TEEP did, so this is actually the second hackathon of this style, okay? There was one that was like a SUIT and,
Right.
And TEEP combined one before.
And
And
we-
so there was a day or more of hackathon, and there was 1 hour of it, which was a virtual meeting, which was both physical presence and lots of remote attendees.
right.
So
So
it was both.
the suggestion may be that we have a joint virtual interim with SUIT and TEEP, but, well, I'm just saying we could do it in addition to, depending on, what shakes out with the requirements and questions with TEEP. And did you have a comment?
I was just going to have a process reminder. I heard both virtual interim, and then I heard interim, and just a reminder, the lead time on notification on an in-person interim is a lot longer than the virtual interim.
Oh, thank you.
Had to follow with it last year,
Yeah, so I think it's 4 weeks versus 2 weeks.
So we're proposing a virtual intro.
Not yet, because a lot of it will depend on doodle poll results and chair availability. Lawrence?
I guess I'm not sure what the procedure is, but if you're going to make it after the 19th, I'd like to know sooner than later if it's I'm planning to attend, but if it's before the 17th, no problem. If it's after the 19th, I'd like to know.
Well, I will try to put out the doodle poll in the next week or 2 so that we know dates.
Okay.
But I need to confer availability of co-chairs as well. Okay, so that was the last order of business that I had. Any other business? Going once, going twice? Wow, we're finishing 6 minutes early. It's Friday. Thank you, everyone.
Safe travels home, everyone.
Safe travels home, and we'll see you in Vancouver. Or if not, in Berlin. All right.